Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the wonderful neighborhood of Forest Hills Gardens. This is one of the very first planned neighborhoods of New York. Planned by, meaning they laid it out before they built it. They built this beautiful train station, which is a station on the Long Island Railroad. They built churches, they built schools. Everything was self-contained in one neighborhood. And if you look around over here, you can see the typical architecture, which we're going to see throughout our tour. The orange tiled roofs, the brick and the wood exteriors, pointed roofs. This is what we call Tudor architecture, named after the Tudor architecture of England. This is the central square in front of us. In the middle of the square, you see a little guardhouse. When this began in the very early 1900s, it was a gated community, meaning only residents were allowed to visit. So if you just walked in like I just did, there would be a guard in the guard tower who would say, "What are you here for? Who did you come to visit? Do you have any reason to be here?" You can see the tower. Across the square was a hotel, a restaurant, businesses. This was all built in the same style. Now, technically, we are still in New York City, but it is a gated neighborhood within New York City. Meaning, as we're going to see, the street signs are not typical New York street signs. There is a type of government which rules the neighborhood, which determines who can live here, how you can decorate your house. If somebody throws a stone through your window, you have to get permission from the Forest Hills Association to make sure that the new window you put in corresponds to the window which was there. There's no variation in architecture. It is going to be very similar to what was originally here in the very early 1900s. Now, we have left the train station, and as you can see, across the way is the hotel, the restaurants, the guardhouse. We are walking across the square. This is the Forest Hills Garden Square. Of course, you don't dare park here because it is parking for residents only. You will be towed within 5 minutes if you even think of leaving your car in this neighborhood. It is patrolled by the Forest Hills authorities, and they make sure that no strange people like me would leave their car in this neighborhood. Now we're leaving the main square with the guardhouse and with the train station, and we are walking down into the heart of Forest Hills Gardens itself. Now, to really appreciate the importance of Forest Hills Gardens, you have to go back to the great period of immigration, which dated from 1870 up until World War I. This was the greatest period of immigration until the immigration reform of 1965. Beginning in 1870, millions of Eastern European Jews migrated. Christians from Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Russian Orthodox Christians from Russia, the Ukraine, as well as Orthodox Jews. hundreds of thousands of Italians migrated, predominantly from southern Italy. So the late 1800s is the period of Little Italies all over Manhattan and Brooklyn and Queens. The Lower East Side, which had 500,000 Orthodox Jews, Yiddish-speaking Jews from Eastern Europe who had migrated. So there were a lot of what we would call WASPs, which means white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. They were not very thrilled with all these Italian and Polish Catholics migrating. They were not happy with all these Orthodox Jews with their beards and side curls and hats migrating to their city. So the WASPs, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, many of them who had been here for centuries in New York, whether they were Dutch or English or German origin, they were not thrilled with what was happening to their New York City. So a group of real estate developers ended up buying this giant area where we are now and decided to build sort of an urban utopia for white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who didn't want to have their neighborhood polluted by Eastern European Yiddish-speaking Jews, dialect-speaking Italian Catholics, and the other, what they considered lower-class people who were migrating to the city. So they built this neighborhood. Now, in the early 1900s, this was already the age of mass transit. The train station where we began our tour dates from the very early 1900s, which meant that a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant banker could live in this beautiful garden environment, could get up in the morning, walk down to the station, jump on the train. Long Island Railroad would take him right into the heart of Manhattan, and he could go to his job in a bank, an insurance company, open his store, or whatever he had as a business. He could then come back just in time for supper, go into the house, have supper with the kids, put the kids to bed, bring over a babysitter, and he and his wife could zip right back into Manhattan, and they could go to the opera, they could go to a museum, they could visit whatever they wanted to in the city. So this was an ideal neighborhood. People bought a plot of land from the real estate developer. They had strict controls on what kind of house they could build. Now, as you can see from just a first glance, all the buildings tend to look alike. Well, they're not exactly alike. Right over here, we see the inn apartments. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 floors of apartments. Now, this was the cheapest way of living in Forest Hills Gardens. Renting an apartment. They might have a little tiny balcony or something like that, but it was basically an apartment. But as soon as you stepped out the front door, you saw the beautiful gardens over here to the right, and Forest Hills maintains its gardens very well. Across the street is a playground for the kids. So you were really, in a way, living in an apartment, but it was not downtown Manhattan. The buildings, as you can see, are all red bricks, stone. Around the windows, each building has its own color code. The entrance, you can see the orange tiles above the door. Everything is regulated. So if you buy an apartment and a window breaks, you can't paint the area around the window a different color. You have to maintain the color scheme of the building. Even the gardens, you can see, are beautifully maintained. There is nothing, no weeds growing or anything. You pay for the gardener who comes in and who takes care of the plants and the flowers. Right over here we can see a brand new tree which was just planted last year, which is beginning to grow, and a tree will replace another tree. So this is the first way of living in Forest Hills, an apartment. Now, another way you could live, if you have a little bit more money, is across the street here to the right. We see a row of houses, one attached to the other. Each has a front yard, each has a backyard. Each one is somewhat different from the other one, but still the same orange tiles on the roof, the pointed roof. This one has brown around all the windows. You can see that it has stucco or red brick. Stucco is in the middle building there. You can see it's a type of cement that's covered the front and is sort of rough on the exterior, but it is a sort of a yellowish brownish color. So this would be a typical, and you can see it's one each side. The side here has two houses. In the middle there are two front doors, and on the left another two front doors. So we have 6 people living, but they share the front yard, maintain it. They share the backyard. So if you don't want an apartment living where the door leads to the hall inside, you can go over here and you can have a front yard and a backyard. Now, some of the trees here are very old. As you can see, this one, this is an oak tree, and this one was planted in the early 1900s when this area was being built. So you can see by the size of the tree, it's approximately 100 years old. Now, if this tree should die, it would be immediately replaced by another tree, same style. They would have to get authorization. Nothing here is left to chance. The Forest Hills Association controls everything. Now, as we can see, you can see the street signs. Here again we see we're not in New York City anymore. These are not blue New York City street signs. These are Forest Hills Association street signs. The names of the buildings. Here we see the street light. In the middle you see the seal of Forest Hills Association, which is a bunch of trees and a little statue in the middle. Painted blue, made out of cast iron. This is very, very typical. Now, parking signs. Everything is controlled by the association. Now, another type of living style is right over here to my left. We'll go down here to the stairway going into the building. Now, once again, you see the stone wall. Very nice garden in the front, well taken care of with a rhododendron and other flowers. Brown around all of the windows. You don't paint around your window yellow or green. Each building has its own very severe color code. Orange tile roofs. You don't vary on that. And so you see here is an entrance. So they have their own personal garden in front. They have a nice apartment, a nice house actually, that's an attached house. And behind it will be their own garden. Now, here it is forbidden to have swings and toys and all kinds of things in the front yard. Okay, well, we're continuing our walk. If you're wondering why I'm wearing a mask, this is the pandemic here in New York. The COVID-19 is ravaging the city. Now, out here in the countryside, in a gated community like Forest Hills, there's really very little danger, but there still are not a lot of people walking the streets. Now, we are here at the corner of Continental Avenue and Slocombe Crescent. Now, as you can see, there's the private streets. Once again, reminding you, you are not in New York City anymore. You are in a private, gated community. Now, just like the street signs, the names of the streets also have a very important meaning. Slocombe, very famous story, General Slocombe. A ship was named after him, and it took tourists from Manhattan up to the parks and the beaches of the Gold Coast, which is along the northern shore of Long Island. Well, there was a terrible accident where a Lutheran Sunday school group with women and children got on the General Slocombe ship, and they were sailing to a picnic during the summer. Well, the ship caught fire and it sank. And so almost everything in this area has some historical associations. The General Slocombe, which was the greatest tragedy for German Lutherans, the very kind of people who were moving here, and so they wanted their memory to be preserved in the street names. Now, this is Continental Avenue. You can see it's straight. It goes from one end of Queens to the other. There are no curved streets or anything. It really is one of the two major roads which are straight, which go directly from the 71st, the train station where we started, cuts right through Forest Hills Gardens, and it goes out the other end of Forest Hills Gardens back into New York City. And of course, once again, at the far end, there is a little round house where the policemen and the security people once again were patrolling. Who comes in and who goes out. Now, we're going to walk up Slocombe Crescent, and we're going to see just some of the various houses which are here. Once again, they all must conform to certain strict standards. Some of them go back to the very early 1900s, and some you'll see are really quite modern, built during the 20s or the 30s, or even up to the 50s. But they have to conform to the architectural style of the Forest Hills Gardens Association. Now, people take great pride in their yards. Over here you can see a more modern house. It looks like it was built after World War II as the neighboring house. But once again, they have a color coordinated around the windows. It is made of stone. This is the black stone which underlies New York City. It's called Manhattan schist. S-C-H-I-S-T. Now, here is some variation, because you do see that you have the tiles, which were at one time orange, but they have started taking on a darker color. By the 1950s, having a garage up front was more and more acceptable. It wasn't something to be banished behind the building. Now, this building across the street, you can see that it is beautifully landscaped, but once again, the garage is back behind the area. Now, times are changing. If you look across the street, we just saw a family walking by. These are Orthodox Jews. These were the people who today can afford to live here. You see Asians who go around. Many of them are doctors and professional people. So the neighborhood is changing with the times, but they do maintain their traditions of only welcoming good quality people. So each house is different, its own style. Here you can see a garage, once again, behind the house. It was not yet popular for the garages to be up front. Over here on the right is one of my favorites. I came here once on a Sunday, and a big beautiful home like this was on the market, and they were having open house. So of course my philosophy is if the front door is open, I'll walk in. And I mean, you saw period fireplaces. Most of these houses did have fireplaces. So if you build a house today, you will never get a permit for a fireplace because it is considered polluting. But if you have a house that already is there and it has a fireplace, well, then it is what we call, it is grandfathered in. So you can see how big this house is. You can see the fireplace is centrally located. Inside, beautiful stone work. The tiled ceiling, this one is stucco. The ground floor over here is made out of stone. So once again, this is a very typical home for the area. Now something like this, we'll finish up our tour at a real estate agency, Sotheby's. And you will see in the window the prices that various houses are going for. So something like this big could go for easily $2 million. Other smaller ones, sort of at an angle like this one, would be considerably less. But you can see the walkway going down in, a little gate, and a very nice backyard. But no toys, no statues of Jesus or Mary in the front. It is still very restricted on how much you can show and how much you can display. Now, this was a neighborhood. The people who lived here, beginning in the early 1900s, were as adamant about preserving their neighborhood. Okay, so here we are continuing our walking tour of Forest Hills Gardens. Now, Forest Hills Gardens, way back in the early 1900s, wanted to be a city within a city, but a city restricted to good white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So we saw the street signs, which were Forest Hills. There were restrictions on how you could decorate your house. Parking was for locals only. But still, it was part of New York City. So when they built this school, which is PS 101, it is part of the New York City school system. Meaning, it takes its orders from the Board of Ed in Manhattan. And if you look up at the top there on the left, you see the seal of New York City. This is the seal of New York City, not New York State, not the United States, not Forest Hills Gardens, but of New York City. Now, you look on the right, you see an Indian. On the Manatees Indian, where we get the name Manhattan. On the left, you see a Dutch settler. In the middle, you see a windmill, which the Dutch built everywhere for grinding corn and wheat into flour. And inside the windmill, there are two beavers, because the beaver skin was the #1 export of the colony of New Amsterdam and New York. And on the other quadrants of the windmill, we see a barrel. This is not barrel of beer, good Dutch beer or English beer, English ale. It was wheat, and which was ground into flour, or corn, which was ground into flour, which was a major export of New Amsterdam and New York after the beaver skins started giving out. Beaver pelts were very, very expensive because the beaver is the only fur of an animal which is naturally waterproof. So you end up with a very expensive skin. And the beaver pelts from New York and New Amsterdam were exported as far as Russia and China and Japan because they were so sought after. Not only for coats, but for boots, for hats, for even umbrella skins. Now, another sign that we are still in New York City, in fact we are in the United States, is of course the mailbox. There's no mail system just for the Forest Hills Garden Association. This is a typical New York or national mail system. So in a way it is an exclusive neighborhood, an ethnic neighborhood in a way within New York City, but yet it does have strong ties with the rest of the city. Now, straight ahead where I'm pointing is another large building, which is very important for the Forest Hills Association. And this is an apartment building, the largest single building. And as you can see, it is either stucco or red brick. All the windows around them are painted in white or a type of bluish gray almost. Once again, keeping with the character of the town. Here we see a tower, which you see the orange tiles on top of the tower. On the left you see a little area that is set apart from the rest of the building, once again with orange tiles. So this is, once again, a very important part of the ethnic neighborhood. This section over here is the gym, a new addition to the school. Even though that was built just not more than a couple of years ago, still you can see the orange tiles on the roof, the brown around the windows, as all of the school is. I'm going to get run over here because of the traffic. And you can see the red brick. So anything that is new has to conform to the style of the neighborhood, the architectural demands of the neighborhood. Now, something which is totally illegal, so we look over here, we see if somebody living there who's hanging laundry and flags outside. They have very strict rules for outdoor Christmas displays, outdoor holiday displays, and even toys and games in the front yard are not only frowned upon, but they are illegal. You can be fined by the Forest Hills Association for doing such things. Now, we are walking down away from the apartment building. You can see the buildings all over, always the same style, some of them which are very old, all featuring beautiful fireplaces, which would be not permitted today. Either orange tiles on the roof or slightly brownish tiles, stucco, red brick, or natural stone. They replace the trees. As soon as a tree starts deteriorating, it will be replaced immediately by the Forest Hills Association. Meaning, like any gated community, you pay a certain amount of money in what we call maintenance, which would be replacing trees, cutting the grass, replacing street curbs. All of this is maintained by the community. Now we are slowly walking back toward the area where we began. Once again, over here is another one of the very beautiful buildings. A big gray, around the windows is gray and yellow. A very almost heavy Victorian style building. heavy stone. Once again, the black stones are very typical Manhattan schist. If you go to Central Park, you see these big outcroppings of black stone, which is the typical very, very hard stone called Manhattan schist. And here again, you can see that there are various apartments in this building. A gate, and once again, the color of the gate, the gray, is coordinated with the buildings itself. Now, across the street is the neighborhood park. You see the monument in the building. This was a monument to commemorate all of the residents of the Forest Hills Association who were killed in the First World War. Now, of course, they don't say the First World War, they say the Great War. And this would be, their names are all listed, and you can see the little park. And you can see we are here during the lockdown, where people have to stay 6 feet away from each other. In fact, just this morning, someone told me that staying 6 feet from somebody else is better than being 6 feet under. So this is, once again, a very, a sort of a central location. Now, people like us are allowed to walk around here. There's no, nobody's going to forbid you from walking here like we are. But just don't think of leaving your car here or spending the night in the park, because it is heavily patrolled. Because when you spend $2 million for a house, the last thing you want is your investment to be undermined by strange activities taking place. So we're walking down the street, in fact, towards the area where we began. Now, as I mentioned, this was white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. There are 3 churches in this area. It was a planned neighborhood. The area was set aside for churches. No Catholic churches, no synagogues. This is all Protestant territory. And here on the right, we see one of the more interesting churches. This is one of the churches which is very, very popular way back in the early 1900s. And this is the first church of Christ Scientist. They was a church founded, interestingly, in the late 1800s by a woman named Mary Baker Eddy. Highly educated woman. The headquarters is until today in Boston, and it caters to a more highly educated group of people. There is another church which is Episcopalian, which is the Church of England, which is on the other side of the neighborhood. And as you can see, the church fits right in with the neighborhood. Once again, it is predominantly of stone. Now, here, very often, since the Christian Scientists are losing members rather rapidly, they will rent it out. So, as the population is changing, I've come here and I've seen a synagogue that rented the church Friday night and Saturday for its church services, and then on a Saturday there might be First Church of Christ Scientists. You can see the Gothic windows on the side, beautiful stained glass windows. So like every ethnic group, the people who lived here wanted to show their wealth, show their sophistication through beautiful architecture, which they didn't want endangered, and through houses of worship, which they considered very much part of their culture. So once again, this building here is absolutely typical, what we would call Tudor. which was inspired by English architecture. And you can see the wooden beams surrounded by bricks. Once again, all the windows are surrounded with brown paint. They have the square panes. You could not replace that window with one great big picture window. That would be forbidden. The gardens and everything are strictly maintained in one style. Here again we see another row of houses, single houses, but attached one to the other, which was another way of living. Now here you might see a nice little porch here, but it's very rare that you would see chairs out here. If you do come out here to sit, you take a folding chair and you'd have to take it in, because that's not the kind of activity they would want to be associated with this neighborhood. So you can see that each person has his own little gate. You go in and they'll have 2 or 3 floors for their personal living situation. So once again, you can see it's really quite a long row of attached houses. Here is a fascinating element. This is typically Tudor. This is what they call a Lynch Gate, which was very typically British. It would be sort of a monumental entrance into your home. And so you can see that it's like a little roof where you'd walk in, and then there would be a garden area that you would walk through. Many Episcopal or Anglican churches have such a gate as sort of a transition space from the street and the sidewalk. A nice gate area, welcoming entrance, and then you go in up the stairs and there you are at the front door. Now, we are coming back to the very spot where we began. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, back here we are going to see a real estate agency that specializes in what we would call high-end residences. And there you will see some of the buildings and houses and apartments in this area which are for sale. Now we're coming up towards the back there. You can see the tower, and then through the gate we can already see the Long Island Railroad Station where we began. Once again, beautiful Tudor. I'd love to have that apartment way up in the top of the tower where you can see a balcony with plants and stuff. That must be an absolutely gorgeous place to live. But I don't think my salary as a teacher is going to permit me to live there. Now we're coming into an area that at one time used to be filled with stores on both sides, but most of the stores have now moved out of this area. And so here we see Sotheby's, which is International Realty. And you can see that they're selling, here's one here. Oh, that's a real bargain. $3,395,000. Spectacular private gardens. This is another one in Forest Hills. A steel at $2,600,000. Another one over here. $3,149,000. Individual standing houses. It has 4 full bathrooms, 2 half bathrooms, and you notice they say school district, PS 101. Very important for New York. Which school district do you live in? Bedrooms are 6. Now the taxes, real estate taxes, are almost $20,000 a year. And it says, you can see the type, detached full masonry Tudor. So this is very typical. In fact, a lot of times when I come here, I bring the students in and we visit. Over here there are more. Oh, there's a bargain. 2 million. This one here is almost 4 million for a individual standing house. Now, Forest Hills Gardens, a lot of people don't even know about it, but it has a very rich history. You can see here they have community information with a map of Forest Hills and Forest Hills Gardens. There are books written on the history of Forest Hills. Some of the very, very famous people who have lived here. So it has its own unique history. A history which is unique and is well over 100 years old. Now down here to finish up, this is a map of the Forest Hills Gardens Association. Now, when you come here, like me, we take Queens Boulevard, and there is the subway station. And then this is Continental Avenue, which cuts right through the neighborhood, and Sachem Avenue, which cuts through. But the dark area is the Forest Hills Association. They don't want long through streets with people driving at a high speed. So the streets are narrow, they are cutting, they circle around, sometimes they're rounded. This is the terrace where we saw the city hall and the church down here. And so this is the neighborhood. Down here is the West Side Tennis Club. Very famous part of Forest Hills, the tennis clubs. But it is surrounded on all sides by the grid plan. So the layout was, we are not part of a grid plan. Here you see the railroad line for the Long Island Railroad, which introduces us to the neighborhood. Station Square, this is where we began. We walked down Continental Avenue, Slocombe, over around here. We didn't even get over into this area, where you have 2 very beautiful churches, magnificent homes. So it is an area where you can walk around, you can enjoy, and have an absolutely magnificent day. So, here we are, right back where we began. You can see, in fact, if you look up there, you can see the Long Island Railroad going through on its way out to the middle of Long Island. And the station, and there you see the police little boxes there where they're not, the police are not there now. It's but originally they were there to make sure that the wrong kind of people weren't roaming around this neighborhood. So here is where we're going to end. Over here you can see the inn, which originally was a hotel, and periodically there's a restaurant, but the restaurants usually don't last too long. You can see martial arts and yoga, which is currently there. So at this point, I will say goodbye, and I hope to see you again on our next walking tour of some exciting New York City neighborhood. So, I will say goodbye. Thank you very much.